United States is mine.
We shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the f*** is wrong with you?
Well, welcome to What the Franklin. I am your affable host, Chip Franklin, here with you till 10 o'clock Pacific time. Wherever you are watching this, thank you so much. Coming up in about a half an hour, we'll be joined by Congressman Eric Swalwell. Lots to talk about with him. I've been interviewing Eric for 7 years, and I love the way he looks at things, and I think you'll appreciate this. We'll talk a little bit about Trump's legal troubles, which they continue to mount, and some of the crazy stuff he's spewing out right now. Dangerous stuff, not just about the Constitution, but the latest. And it's been echoed by sycophants here and there. We're also going to get to, coming up in a little bit, talk about the latest on gay marriage. The Supreme Court seems to be ready to make a decision on kind of the old, the bakery, wedding cake fiasco. Well, now we're going to find out whether or not a business can actually refuse to do work for somebody that they just disagree with their point of view, their religion, their skin color. I mean, we're going to go back to whether or not, a black person can eat in a restaurant or drink from a water fountain or stay in a hotel. And this is something that I think that when we talk about our country, we should really remember that we're only about 60 years old. And let me explain, because before 1964, we had apartheid. We had separate bathrooms and restaurants and hotels and neighborhoods for people who were black and who were people who were white. It wasn't as violent as what happened in South Africa, although I'm sure there's some African Americans that will tell you different. But, that's going to be an important thing to talk about. And we'll be joined by attorney Randy Zellin, an old friend, coming up in just a few minutes. And a little bit later on in the show, an old friend of mine who was a former press secretary for U.S. Senator and handles a crisis management firm. We'll talk a little bit more about what's going on, again, with some of the legal problems and some of the political problems that the Republican Party faces. So there's a lot here today. And also the best thing you'll see on the internet today, we have that coming up too. But let's talk a little bit about Georgia right now, because obviously this is a race that is more than just whether or not Herschel Walker will become a U.S. Senator, which is hard to imagine that that's even a possibility when you think about the things this guy says and the things this guy does. Herschel Walker, again, a former football player who, who's just not all there. Let's be honest, right? I mean, he's being backed by the Republican Party like everything's normal.
This man will change the Republican Party.
Herschel.
This man will change the Republican. It was actually dead on there. Joining us right now, though, from Capitol Hill Reporter, the Hill Reporter, it's actually called, is Todd Nykirk. And Todd, this is the day, obviously, I read 2 million people have already voted in Georgia. And there's some of the exit polling had it close to 60% for Democrats, but there's still a lot of worry down there, right?
Yeah. So right now, the last I saw, Walker's belt, or at least Democrats have a 13-point lead. And,
what? You're saying Warnock has a 13-point lead over Walker?
In early voting. So 13% more Democrats have voted than Republicans.
And that's based on exit polls.
That's based on, the available information.
It's interesting. I've been voting my whole life, and I've never seen anybody doing exit polling. I guess when people come out, and have you ever done it? Have you ever walked up to somebody? Who did you just vote for? Because I would imagine that people don't react well to that.
Yeah, and you don't know, if they're going to tell you the truth or not, if they have some ulterior motive.
And can I jump in too on the polling? I've been reading some of this because you got everything from Quinnipiac to Rasmussen. Rasmussen doesn't hide their bias. It's a right. I mean, there's stuff during the Trump 4 years, they always had Trump about 11 points higher than every other poll. So whether it was USA Today or Washington Post or New York Times, or I mentioned Quinnipiac or others, Rasmussen always had it higher. But one of the things that I think that's changed with polling is that young people don't answer their phone if they don't recognize the number.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't do it. Do you do it if you don't recognize number?
Absolutely not.
Right. So how are you getting an accurate reflection of what young people are thinking or
Yeah, I
who
mean,
they're
I
going to
think
vote for?
different pollsters are trying out different models.
Texting?
Online, internet, texting. Nothing's perfect, and you're really not going to know up until the day of. You saw in the midterms here, we had some of the polls were really good, and some of the polls were really bad. It seemed like the Republicans were kind of flooding the zone with Republican-leaning polls that made those averages look a little better than they were.
Didn't we kind of learn a lesson, though, from 2016 about polling, that it can be really fluid near the end? I mean,
it's just like anything. It's a tool, and it's not the end-all, be-all. It'll just kind of give you a pulse, and there's people tend to look at the polls and see the numbers and go by that and ignore the margin of error. That margin of error is there for a reason, because it's
I used to do a joke in stand-up that said they did a poll and found out 80% of people don't believe in polls, right?
Mhm.
And there is something oddly ironic about putting this much faith in that. So last time Walker won by 37,000 votes. Okay. And of course now it's a two-man race instead of was the independent more right or left?
He was a libertarian candidate.
Okay, so right.
So, yeah, it probably could have gone either way.
Interesting. So we don't have any real way to gauge this other than, when the polls close, and we'll start to hear. Does Georgia count the mail-in votes when they come in, or do they wait till today to start counting them?
Georgia's gonna start counting today, I believe. Most red states. Florida is interesting, and Florida is kind of the exception that counts the mail-in as they come in. But Georgia will wait until today. It's
hard to kind of fathom how Walker could win after just 2 years ago. Warnock and Ossoff, a black preacher and a Jewish man win in a state like Georgia. And I wonder that the fact that Trump stayed away, where did that come from? I mean, who tells Trump to stay out of Georgia?
Yeah, it's interesting because you think, nobody has control over him, right? It's obviously worked though. Somebody got to him and said, you're a detriment here.
He's
especially in Georgia.
He's like, you have no idea where he's going to end up.
Yeah, you have Kemp, who's not exactly pro-Trump. You have Raffensperger and Jeff Duncan, who are not pro-Trump at all.
All backing Walker, right?
Well, Duncan came out and said he didn't vote for either candidate. He's the lieutenant governor of the state, Republican lieutenant governor of the state. So he said Walker's one of the worst candidates ever. I went to the polling place and I couldn't bring myself. It was a little performative, but he said I couldn't bring myself to cast a ballot for either candidate.
Isn't there a current investigation into Trump and his push to get Raffensperger to give him votes?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, yeah. I mean, I've been trying to, I was doing a little bit of research, I talked to one reporter down there who couldn't come on the show today. And it was in Atlanta, and it was like for one of the, news talk stations that carries Hannity and everybody else. And they're like, we don't really know because, when we talk to people in, for example, the investigation that's going on in the background, and how that will affect if Walker is elected. And wouldn't affect it at all, really, because Walker would be a federal employee, and not a state employee. But I mean, to me, I always found that interesting that you had this going on in the background, yet you had these pretty conservative Republicans in that state. I wonder when this all sits down and we look at it, does Georgia really have the capacity to be a blue state? I mean, are there enough people in that state, if they voted, to turn that state blue?
It's a major transplant state. I'm sure we all know people that have moved down to Georgia and that Atlanta area for this or another. It's kind of like the idea that Texas is slowly turning just because, people from all over the country are moving there. And figures like Obama was very popular in Georgia. I think if Obama could run now, he'd win Georgia by 10 points,
You think Obama could win Florida today?
No, I think Florida's lost.
What do you mean it's lost? That's
I think it's a state that, Democrats should stop putting so much effort into it and, chase more winnable states. I really do think it's lost.
Wow, that's crazy. Because when I think of Herschel Walker, I think that in some ways, Herschel Walker is the worst thing that could happen for the Republicans in 2024, just because of the things he said and the kind of, I mean, he's not just a man who can barely not speak well in public, but he has a past that's dangerous too.
And I'm just it's a shame.
It's horrible.
Like that, and I say it is sad. But if you love America, you got to fight for America. I told people this, and I want all the African Americans out there to hear, all the white America, all the Latino America, all America. If you don't like America, you can go to the country you like, because we're not going to hold you here. We're not going to.
I mean, how long have we been hearing this? You ain't from around here, are you, boy? Right?
Yeah.
I mean, get out of here with that long hair. Love it or leave it. I remember when I was growing up as a kid. This is something obviously that Trump has echoed a few times as well. The idea that we could remove people. I mean, I don't even go down the Trump thing, but Trump actually and Walker. How do I say this? They share some commonalities. Neither of them can very well articulate a position, right, without going off on some odd tangent. Even when Trump has a freaking teleprompter, he can't stay on message. I guess the question is that, so when the polls close, at 7 tonight Eastern, is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Two things. Number one, how long will we know? And if it's possible that Republicans lose, will this be a new lightning rod for the stolen election and the continued? I mean, or will Georgia shut that crap down?
I think you have a strong.
To interrupt you, Todd. I've been reading this morning. There's been no irregularities. Nobody's complaining. So far, Georgia's running it perfectly, and right now it's 15 past 12 in back east. So they've been open for 5 hours, and that's good. So far.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw in 2020 that, this team of Raffensperger and the people involved in the election are going to push back on claims of election fraud in a dissimilar way than, some other Republicans in some of the close states like Arizona, did in 2020. I mean, they've already been tested with this, idea. I think that so much steam came out of this race once, Cortez Masto won in Nevada and Democrats secured, control regardless. I think this would be a very different race, if that wasn't to happen and if this was for control. I feel like a lot of Republicans feel that, this is a bad candidate. We held our breath and voted for him, either because Brian Kemp was on the ballot and we were voting for Brian Kemp anyway, and he's popular, or because this could mean Senate control, and those two things aren't.
Kemp did make a couple 100,000 African-American votes disappear in his gubernatorial run against Stacey Abrams. Yeah. And that's a fact. That's not one of these, big lie. You can actually go and see that these repetitive names were tossed because people thought it was, they're in a different state. Joe Washington and Georgia's vote was thrown out because somebody in Wisconsin who was an African-American was named Joe Washington. I mean, that's insane, obviously. But so anyway, so do you anticipate during the day, are they going to start releasing numbers from precincts, or do we get it all right at 7 o'clock? And then
I think you're going to be looking at 7:30, and we'll have Kornacki up on the board, or John King, or wherever you go to get your nail-biting election news.
It was great to see you again. Thank you so much for joining us on this. I know you've been watching it all day, and we might check in with you again tomorrow. Thank you. All right.
Great. Thanks, Jeff.
Be well, buddy. That again, Todd Niekirk from Hill Reporter on the election in Georgia today for the U.S. Senate seat. There was a two-way runoff because the top two didn't get 50%, although Warnock narrowly missed it. So that's where we are. I want to just mention this real quick before we get into our next story. And this has to do with the loss of Kirstie Alley, who you probably saw died at 71 from cancer. and it's heartbreaking when anybody dies, and that is young, right? But I also got, my thought is that there was also a Hall of Fame voting today, and Curt Schilling didn't get voted in. And I don't know if Curt Schilling is a real Hall of Fame pitcher, but I don't think he'll get in because of his politics. And I think Kirstie Alley's legacy will always be stained by her support for the January 6th insurrection. And I don't know how I feel about that. I mean, I think both of these people are, interesting. We're getting to a little bit of that tomorrow about, the people that have been caught up in this and how it will affect the rest of their lives and careers. Also want to remind you that Moskowitz LLP is our supports us in this every day. They are such a great tax attorney firm. Steve Moskowitz, who is occasionally on the show and can tell you anything you need to know about taxes, he can tell you with a simple phone call, 888-TAX-DEAL, 888-TAX-DEAL. So if you know anybody that hadn't filed, or maybe you have an accountant and you're wondering, am I getting all the deductions I should? These are all questions that, a lot of people ask. And the difference between a tax attorney and an accountant is huge. You can tell a tax attorney anything. I didn't put all this money in the bank a couple of years ago. If you tell an accountant that and they're subpoenaed, they got to give you up. So anyway, Steve Moskowitz, MoskowitzLLP.com. Check it out. All right, coming up in about 15 minutes, we'll be joined by Congressman Eric Swalwell. We'll talk about Trump's legal problems. And well, let's kind of jump into that, I guess, before we get him there. Randy Zellin is a former federal prosecutor and now a criminal defense attorney, and he joins us here on What the Franklin. Randy, long time, my friend. Look at you all dressed up. You look good.
Come on, I got to do what I got to look good in front of you and your audience.
Hey, let me ask you a question. So at one point, Trump, referring to one of the women who accused him of sexual assault, Jean Carroll, I believe was her name, said she was too ugly to be raped. Is that a civil offense? I know it's not criminal, but is that a civil offense? No.
When you say a civil offense, are you talking about is
actionable.
What he said actionable? No, because from the standpoint of is it defamatory, that's purely opinion. Okay. And what we do is we look at the difference between a fact and an opinion is whether or not it can be proven to be objectively true or false. So saying that someone is ugly or someone is good looking, that's subjective. That can't be objectively proven to be true or false. Saying that you raped me, that can be objectively determined to be true or false.
Right. Yeah, if my wife says it's fact, if I say it, it's opinion. I think I got it down.
Well, I mean, with me, if my wife says it, it's written in stone. And if I say it, I'm an idiot. So you've got me beat. Okay.
This 6-3 Supreme Court is definitely living up to its billing. The Roe v. Wade, it wasn't a Roe v. Wade case, but the fact that they've allowed states now to decide whether or not a person can have an abortion at any stage. You've seen some states that, like Ohio, that have said not even under rape or incest, and that's a whole nother thing. But it has led us to wonder about gay marriage and whether or not that is a contract that is guaranteed under the Constitution.
So back in 2018, the U.S. Supreme Court took up a case pitting LGBTQ rights against religious conservatives. It narrowly ruled in favor of a Colorado baker who refused to make a wedding cake for a same-sex couple. Remember that? But that majority opinion essentially said at the time that it would wait for a, quote, future controversy to decide the broader legal questions about whether the First Amendment allows businesses open to the public to discriminate based on religion or free speech objections. In the years since, the court refused several opportunities to answer that question, but today the day has come. In opening arguments earlier, the now 6-3 conservative supermajority appeared sympathetic to a website designer who says Colorado's anti-discrimination law violates her right to free speech.
We've all had arguments along these lines, you more than I as an attorney. But if I have a business, people say, why shouldn't I be able to, excuse me, why shouldn't I be able to discriminate against who comes in my business? And one of the answers is well, because the roads and the electricity and the infrastructure that you use were paid by all these people. So they should have equal access to your business. I don't know if that's the actual argument, but I've heard it before. Randy, as we move forward here, I see kind of an incremental exploration by jurists and Republicans and conservatives is to have we given rights to people that are not enumerated in the Constitution? Of course we have, but should this be one of them? And let's start with, whether or not a business should have to serve gay people. And if not gay people, then why not blacks or Jews or anybody else down that level?
Well, I think you just made the point. And I hate to use the term slippery slope, but it's actually quite applicable here to your point, because if it's okay for me as a lawyer, I'm not going to represent someone who's gay. Right. Well, okay, what's next? Is it okay for me to say, I'm not going to represent someone who's Hispanic? I'm not going to represent someone who is Jewish. I am not going to represent, and the list goes on and on and on and on. But I will tell you, Chip, it reminds me of the old saying, even if I can do something, even if the law says you're a private business, you can decide who you want to serve. The question is, should I? Now, I understand the religious component, and quite frankly, it's odd that we're talking about this today, because I was really debating this with my wife last night. We're binge watching White Lotus right now, and we got into the conversation of, okay, what happens in this very situation? Can I refuse to serve someone because they're gay? And she pushed back very strongly, where I said, absent a religious reason, why can't you? And then she hit me with, well, what's going to be next and what's going to be next? So I think that really is the far more pragmatic, and I think the more common sense argument.
Okay, but again, we know the Constitution does not provide for these protections specifically. And
but I'm glad that you raised that, because nowhere in the Constitution does it say that gay people have a right to marry. In fact, nowhere in the Constitution does it say that people have a right to marry. Yet, we all know that the right to marry is, in fact, protected by the Constitution. It's a fundamental liberty right. And the 14th Amendment says, no one shall be deprived of their life, liberty, or property without due process of law, and everyone is entitled to equal protection under the law. And the Supreme Court has said, well, if there is a liberty right to marry, and that is a fundamental protection under the 14th Amendment, you have a constitutional right to be married. Well, nowhere does it say you have to be of opposite sex to be married. So in fact, the Supreme Court has said, if you can marry someone of the opposite sex, you can marry someone of the same sex, and it's protected.
Talking to attorney, former prosecutor, criminal defense attorney, Randy Zellin, here on What the Franklin. Coming up in just a couple minutes, we'll be joined by Congressman Eric Swalwell. We'll talk about Trump's legal troubles. I want to ask you that too before we go. But the idea, though, like what the Supreme Court's going to do is they're going to turn it around and give it back to the states and say, a state should be able to determine, I guess, looking at the 10th Amendment, that they can make this decision whether or not they want to allow people of the same sex to marry. Because they'll say, well, then why not 3 people?
Well, actually,
I know that's BS. I know it's a BS to a lot of people, but the truth is, does the federal government really have that power? And if they exercise it, you talk about slippery slope, it goes both ways, right?
Yes,
and that's what they say.
But the Supreme Court has said absolutely unequivocally, the right to marry is a fundamental freedom. Therefore, the right to marry someone of the same sex is a fundamental freedom protected by the Constitution, and the states cannot pass a law contravening.
Well, if you can come in my doctor's office and watch my examination, if I'm a woman, to determine whether or not I'm pregnant, this doesn't seem like much of a stretch for this court, these 6 justices or 5 justices, whatever it'll be, to say that, a state doesn't have to give 2 people the same sex. We have the right to engage in this legal contract that we have reserved for people of the opposite sex. And they could go down the list and say, and make a case that, like anything that there's a lot. Why do women have to wear shirts in public? And we've all decided, but maybe because we're not ready to deal with that if we don't. There's some things, if you just look at them, that make absolutely no sense whatsoever.
Chip, you are far wiser than I know when you're self-effacing, then you give yourself credit for, because it goes on and on and on to the point where you almost say, why do we even have laws? because you can look at any particular set of circumstances and say, why is that necessary? And we take it for granted. If a man can walk around without a shirt on, why can't a woman?
Well, I mean, and I look at the one that gets me the most is, and it troubles me, is the January 6th insurrection case against Trump, saying that he incited the mob. He said, let's walk to the Capitol. He did say peacefully. I mean, everything about that day was wrong, but everything about it is Trump. It's mobster mentality. You'll never hear a mobster say, go kill that guy for me. He'll say, hey, you know that thing we need to get done? Let's get it done. And it's open interpretation. They all act like they have that somebody has a wire. And that's what he did that day. And when people say, oh, no, I worry a little bit about, what happens in 2024 if Trump should become president, which I don't think will happen, and the Republicans and Democrats take over the legislative bodies with a 6-3 Supreme Court. Trump is already talking about tearing up a constitution. Trump is already talking about the need for a revolution. We have Carrie Lake, who wanted to be the governor of Arizona, talked about it, the need sometimes she misquoted Jefferson talking about a violent revolution. He never said that. Jefferson instead said we should tear up the Constitution every 5 years and rewrite it. It's okay. But the idea that we need to spill blood, we're starting to hear from a group of people that I never would have expected it. When the Supreme Court has made in the past unpopular decisions, let's pick one that they quickly overturned, which was prohibition. Does the groundswell of anger and angst affect these justices? I know it's not supposed to, but Alito was making jokes about the other day about black kids they often wear Ku Klux Klan outfits. I'm like, what? So, is this Supreme Court different than any other court that you remember or you've ever read about?
Well, I think it's changed. I think historically, I think growing up, I think as a young lawyer, the Supreme Court was exactly as its title. It was someplace different. It was its own thing. Just looking at the building and the magnificence of the building and the solemnity of the proceedings, right on down to the pen that you get. I've never argued in the Supreme Court, but I've spoken to people who have, and it's magical. I've argued in the circuit courts, and it's a magical place. But the Supreme Court, that's like Yankee Stadium of old. The ghosts and just everything about it, it just oozes history. And I do believe that it's changed. And I think somewhere, somehow, the luster, the aura has knocked the Supreme Court. It's not the same as it used to be, even when the Supreme Court.
And that's what Roberts was really worried about, right? Roberts was really trying to defend the integrity of a court, not have it be.
It's not the same.
Ginny Thomas is all you need to know, right?
The world is exactly. Look, the world is not the same, but. What I'm reminded of, and again, this is just one of those things where it's fortuitous. It's my wife who's my conscience at times. She reminds me things do come back, and somehow the world ends up being righted, and the ship ends up coming out of the storm, and the water's calm.
Here's the problem with that, though. You and I, we have a certain privilege. And many of the things that obviously the Supreme Court will do will affect people of color, LGBT, Jewish, others. And when you have Fuentes saying the Jews better watch out for people like me, and then one day he's sitting at a table with a former president, I think we've crossed the line, and we'll just have to see. Hey, got to run. Good to see you, my friend. You look great.
Thank you for having me. Great to see you.
I know you got a busy day. I really appreciate your time. Okay. Thank you. Randy Zellen again. Just good people. But those are difficult questions, that we're trying to figure out. By the way, thank you everybody for being with us here. I appreciate it. I would remind you, please subscribe and press the little bell up there, and that'll tell you when we do these shows. We do them every day at 9:00. A little bit later on next week, we have some great guests. We'll be joined by people like Wanda Sykes and Henry Winkler. And as I mentioned before, we're going to talk a little bit tomorrow about the loss of Kirstie Alley and the fact that Schilling didn't get into the Hall of Fame. And I just wonder, I actually have a relationship with a person who voted for Trump, and we're mending it. And I'm wondering if that's the way we move forward. Our next guest is one of my favorite people to talk to, just because, he just tells it like it is. As Congressman Eric Swalwell, and he joins us here on What the Franklin. Been a long time, Congressman. You look good.
Hey, Chip. How you doing? I just came back from the Congressional Gold Medal ceremony for the January 6 heroes, and that was just a boost that everyone needed around here, just to be reminded of the heroism in our building that day.
My dad was Capitol Police, and my mom worked for the U.S. District Attorney in Alexandria. So, we used to go down to the Capitol a lot. Back when I was a kid, you could walk right up the stairs and walk down the hall, and hey, there's Ted Kennedy. And it was a very unique experience. I want to talk to you about what Trump faces and the legal issues he faces, the things he said in the past, obviously with Jean Carroll and others, saying that she was too ugly to rape, and just this horrible language. Most recently, talking about the possible need for a violent revolution, and then, saying we need to tear up the Constitution. Obviously, there's 3 strong separate investigations about the papers, about January 6th, and what's going on in Georgia right now. What catches your eye, and what has you most concerned, or hopeful, I should say, that that this will have a resolution that most Americans think is fitting?
Well, Chip, he is more and more isolated from the party, as folks try and seek more and more distance from him. Herschel Walker, of all candidates who Trump recruited, doesn't even want Trump in Georgia. He's isolated, from much of the legal protections that he's had in the past because of his stature as president, and he's starting to realize that he doesn't have that immunity anymore, and the walls are closing in civilly and criminally with those investigations, and he's isolated from reality as he seeks.
Well, we lost your button there for a second there, Congressman. You muted yourself, I think. Oh my God, how many times has your wife wanted to do this? I bet, right? What happened here? There it is. We're back now.
Are we good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Sorry. Chip.
Anyway, he's isolated himself, obviously, but I guess the question is has he isolated himself in a way that the law can't reach him, or is hesitant to, because as he kind of fades into the distance, we're like, do we really want to kick that hornet's nest?
Right. So as I was saying, he's isolated, from the immunity he's had in the past. Okay. And I think he's starting to realize that as, we reach a legal crescendo, on the civil and criminal cases that are coming his way. And he's isolated from reality as he believes that we can just tear up the Constitution, to benefit him. And you're right. I mean, when you have someone so isolated with nothing to lose, and so many people who still follow him, it is scary to think, what he could call them to do. And I was listening to your prior segment, and you're right. This guy he speaks in code, but it's a code that the followers understand. And we saw that when, he violently assembled them on January 6th, and then violently incited them and aimed them at the Capitol. After the violence had occurred and the mob started to clear out, you heard from a number of different pieces of video evidence that they were going home because Donald Trump told them to go home. So they listen to everything this guy says. They hang on his words. And I see personally the threats that come into my direct messages or our voicemails or our email, or that I see on the street or on airplanes that mimic and mirror his rhetoric. So they listen to this guy. And so that's what is concerning.
I live in San Diego, and a friend of mine, his pool was cleaned by Ashley Babbitt's family. And so he would see them around occasionally. And he used to tell me after Ashley Babbitt, for those that don't know, was the woman that was killed trying to enter the Capitol. And he said that, it was sad because she's obviously was not a person that was really incredibly bright or did not look far down, to really understand what was going to happen. But when I think of January 6th, I tell people the story you told me on the air, and just, you're on the floor in the House, and you call your wife and she's giving the kids a bath, and there's two different worlds happening here. The real world that we should all live in and be able to do, which is to go do our jobs and then go home. Obviously, Capitol Hill police couldn't do that. Metropolitan police couldn't do that. Many journalists and of course, the people in that building that were there to do the work that the Constitution demanded that they do. And I don't know if that has really sunk in to America, just how close we came to this whole thing flipping over. Did you ever hear that maybe that Hogan and others were worried if they sent the National Guard that day, that Trump would have called for the National Guard to actually work for him? And has that been one? I mean, there's a lot of stories that go about that day. How many are true and how many still concern you?
Chip, the final report comes out pretty soon from the January 6th Commission. That's a question that I hope they answer. But what does seem clear to me, though, is he absolutely abdicated his duty, to protect the country, and abdicated his oath that he took to protect the country when he did nothing, for those 187 minutes from when the mob started to violently attack the Capitol, and then when help arrived. It was actually Speaker Pelosi, as we've seen in some of the footage. She was the one, who was in command and control, working with the generals, the military brass, law enforcement to get support to the Capitol that day, as the president did nothing. And that itself, I think, is worthy of him, having been impeached the second time.
It's a lot of people probably know this, but 187 is also the police, code for murder. Yeah. I think that the thing that bothers me, that hurts the most, is that, like you and many others, we grew up with a belief that there was something iconic and different about our system. And I still believe that, despite what's happening right now. But I do wonder, the Marjorie Taylor Greenes and Beauperts aside, as we move forward and with this Republican run House, at least that seems to be the done deal now. Will it be the insanity of Trump? Will we have, will they bring Fauci in and have Rand Paul do his ridiculous dance and have to listen to Green on a Judiciary Committee? All these, or will the sanity come back into play? What are you feeling right now?
The Judiciary Committee is going to become the land of misfit toys. It'll be essentially a vessel state for MAGA Nation. And, that committee and, the Looney Tunes members who are a part of it on the Republican side, they're going to form a law firm that will have just one client. It'll be Donald Trump, and they will litigate all of his petty grievances, whether it's Hunter Biden, the quote unquote stolen election, seeking to defund, the FBI, investigating, the border and impeaching the Secretary of Homeland Security. It's all going to go through the Judiciary Committee. So I'll stand in the breach with my colleagues to make sure that they have no credibility, to make sure that truth is defended and that the falsities are called out, and to remind the American people that these guys ran to seek the majority, promising to bring down the cost of gas, groceries, address crime, and that they're doing none of that. They actually really just wanted to go into the majority to conduct these investigations to benefit, as I said, the MAGA Nation.
We're talking to Congressman Eric Swalwell, who ran against Joe Biden in the primaries for the nomination. And, I got to tell you, even Clyburn saw it. And I think the rest of us began to see, that summer of 2020. Yeah. I think I think a lot of people, including Democrats, underestimated this guy. I don't know why, because he's only been doing it for half a century, right? But the acumen and the timing and his presence, it's been really remarkable. And I'm not just saying that as a person that voted for him. I'm saying that I really think I can say that with a certain degree of fairness, that he has really overperformed.
Yes. And Chip, I like to harken back to the inaugural address, and he used, a writing or a speech technique that I think is pretty effective, which is, to essentially start where you're going to end. And in that speech, he referenced that he will unite not all of us, because there's just, as we saw on January 6th, as we see in the Congress, there are some people who do not want to be united. they're anarchists, but he will unite enough of us, to take care of and look after all of us. And since he said that, we passed the rescue plan. We passed gun safety legislation in a bipartisan way. We passed the infrastructure bill in a bipartisan way. We passed the CHIPS Act in a bipartisan way. We passed the PACT Act, which addresses veterans' needs in a bipartisan way. So he has united enough of us to look after all of us. And I think that's, how history will, regard, the Biden presidency, whether it's, 1 or 2 terms. That's who he's always been, has been a uniter. And I think that, will withstand the test of time.
How important is it to members of the House, a slight minority now, to have Warnock in there as opposed to Walker and have those 51 votes? Obviously, there won't be enough. There won't be enough there. Should in 2020. Well, I don't know. I guess my question is, what does that mean to you? Is it a harbinger of bad times though? Should Walker win, that we're still not done with the stink of Trump?
Well, I think first and foremost, Warnock's just a terrific senator,
right?
And
yeah.
he's done a good job. He was able to advocate for in the Inflation Reduction Act a lot of pieces that benefit Georgians, and we'll see an increase in manufacturing in Georgia. So he's a good senator. Just voting for column A or column B, like it's clear that he's much better than Herschel Walker. And then for the Senate, to have an insurance policy with 51 senators, one, Kamala Harris doesn't have to hang around the Senate every day, to break a tie in case there's a tie.
Right.
So it frees her up to, help the administration more. And it takes away some of the leverage that a single senator can have if they want to slow down something that has broad consensus. And so it actually effectively is a lot. And again, I was talking.
It also doesn't it make you though kind of reach across the aisle a little more when you're trying to get a bill passed, knowing that it will pass over there. So I mean, in some ways, it can actually be good for the Republicans in the House because they know how bad we want the legislation now they can pass in the Senate, and so maybe they can get the things for their districts. Better than most how this whole thing works. So it seems to me that the Republicans can win with Walker losing. And House Republicans, and maybe I'm stretching it a little bit, but that's my hope. Hey, let me ask you one last question here. I know you got a crazy day, and I appreciate your time, Congressman. What did you take away from your run for the White House? I mean, you're a young man. You could do it again if you want. It was, and I thought you did well. I tell you, I quote you all the time. No, seriously, I do. When you're on Bill Maher and Maher was complaining about the Dakotas, I think it was the Dakotas, like, why they got 4 senators and they got 3 guys named Daryl and a coyote. And your response, you remember what you told him?
Yeah, I told him my mom was born in South Dakota, and maybe we should go back to the days where we could win in South Dakota, because in my lifetime, we've had senators from North and South Dakota. And so it's time that we, not complain about it or have a, fantastical idea that we would,
wasn't McGovern from one of the Dakotas? Wasn't McGovern?
Consolidate the Dakotas.
George McGovern was a Dakota. My next guest worked with him, I know, and he's shaking his head right now. Maybe, John, was I right? Shake your head. He's not. Yeah, I am. I was right. Okay, that's right. So to your point, it can be done. You going to run for president again?
No, I have the antibodies for it. I've been tested a number of times, so can't catch it again.
Yeah, well, I would bet.
I love my job, Chip. And as I said, we're in the Judiciary Committee. They're going to use that committee to try and dirty up and scandalize Joe Biden, give him, the Benghazi treatment that they tried to give Secretary Clinton. And, I'm up and my colleagues are up for making sure that, truth has a defense on that committee.
Yeah. Well, again, always great to hear your voice.
You too, pal.
You stay well, my friend. Okay. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Thanks, Chip. Yep.
Thank you, Congressman. Bye-bye again. Congressman Eric Swalwell from the Bay Area. And that's how I got to know him when I was working at KGO Radio, which doesn't exist anymore. Crazy. Hey, a lot of great stuff here. Really appreciate your thoughts. Thank you, Ricky. Appreciate that. Some hellos to the Congressman. I don't get this up really quickly because I don't multitask as well as I should. Yeah, and this is a great point here. No, that was not the one I meant. This is the one that investigate Michael Flynn's brother on 1/6. He is actually in the military. There's a lot here we can talk about. But yeah, the thing I like about Eric Swalwell is exactly what he said tomorrow in that interview. Is like let's take this Democratic Party and turn them into more of a pragmatic machine that can get things done can get things done and move forward in a pragmatic way that shows middle America that we're not just about all we do, we will protect the rights of LGBT and we'll protect all that, but we're more than a drag show, that we're more than this. We're for everybody. So whether you're, a Baptist family living in Alabama, we want to protect your rights as much as we want to do, an LGBT member who wants to do something that somebody else finds outrageous, all totally within the law and within our rights. So to that point, we've actually heard Herschel Walker try to speak to this intelligently, which is near impossible when he was referring to LGBT and the pronouns. I'm not going to play it for you, but at one point it says, there's a he or she pronouns. He goes, I don't even know what a pronoun is. But I mean, that's the kind of embarrassing run we've had. And to see Lindsey Graham time and time again come out and support him, and to see Ted Cruz and others, with Trump, it was pretty obvious. I mean, because Trump called them horrible names, mocked their size of their penises, and yet they came and supported him. Evangelicals in Georgia support Donald Trump, which is a mind blower. But that said, I think that, again, the Democratic Party can still find some appeal to these people and saying, we're not after your guns. We're not after your religion. We don't care. And neither did James Madison, when he wrote the First Amendment. My next guest is a very old friend of mine. He was a press secretary for Tom Eagleton. And after his ill-fated alliance with George McGovern in 1972, so that John is old. He's also now has his own crisis management public relations firm. But I don't know anybody that follows politics closer than him. His name is John Austin, is the John Austin Group. Hello, Mr. Austin. I caught you right putting something in your mouth. That was good.
I was taking a sip of coffee there, Chip, so I'd be caffeinated to keep up.
I remember my wife and I were lying in bed after watching the election of 2020, and our phone rings at about 1 a.m, and we pick it up because we thought that Trump was going to win, and you were there telling us, no, the numbers look like now he's going to succeed. So I'm going to throw that on your back again and ask you if you're feeling anything from looking at these early returns and the fact that 2 million people already voted in Georgia. What's your sense of this thing?
The conventional wisdom has it called pretty much for Warnock, right? So I think there's going to be a lot of very surprised political pundits and pollsters if it doesn't go that way tonight. But you never know, right? It is, as I'm sure any of your guests will say, it's all about turnout. And if all of the MAGA folks heard their master's call last night and get up and say, by God, I'm going out to vote for Herschel Walker, that could make a race of it. We'll see, but pop the popcorn. We'll have an evening of it.
Yeah. I was telling this, I don't know if you were listening to, when I was talking to Congressman Swalwell. In some ways, I think that, whoops, John? Oh, okay. Well, there he is.
All right.
Okay.
Went dark for a second. You were talking to Congressman Swalwell.
No, when I said to him about, I think the, it's funny because I think in somewhere, and this is, this better than I do, but let's say there's a 6-vote majority for the Republicans. Right. I'm just going to throw that number out. That seems to be a number that I've seen around somewhere about 223, 224. And those aren't the kind of numbers that they were expecting. And those aren't the kind of numbers that you really need to be able to get some crazy stuff through, like if you want to impeach Biden.
You not only just the crazy stuff through, hell, you can't even get apparently a speaker's vote through. Right. With that narrow majority. So, who do
the crazies want? They don't want McCarthy, but who do they want?
Well, they somebody, I was reading an article, somebody put it really pretty accurately. I think these guys aren't really policy types. They're not really promoting an agenda or an advocate for an agenda. they're anarchists. They like to muck things up. And usually people think of anarchists as coming in from the left, but these are anarchists coming in from the right. Right. Marjorie Taylor Greene and Matt Gaetz and some of these, Paul Gosar, they really are, if you follow the logic of what they recommend, they want to burn it down. And it's a pretty radical thing, especially, like I said, especially coming from that end of the spectrum.
Well, I mean, and you say that, I mean, obviously Trump's comments about the Constitution should have had Republicans screaming from the top of their lungs. He retweeted something the next day on his Truth Social, but you go back and look at it, it's exactly what everybody said he said. That,
Donald Trump will never admit he's wrong. The closest he's come is what he's done in the last couple of days, where he's been, I think, surprised by the amount of backlash he's gotten. And his version of "I screwed up, I'm sorry" is the media is misquoting me, even, as you point out, in a case where where all they're doing is saying exactly what he said. He said, tear up regulations, including the Constitution. It doesn't get any clearer than that.
Well, and I think, again, one of the things, and we're going to talk about this tomorrow a little bit more, but so we're close friends. We've known each other 40 years. And when I started out and I was doing talk radio and I was doing more to the right, not socially, but, fiscally and listening. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of woke up in the aughts, when I started to see it was an economic thing. I realized, oh, this is all bullshit. The rising tide is not lifting any boats. That no corporation with a tax break ever hires people. They only hire people when they have a demand for their product. And the best way to get a demand for your product is to give the money and tax breaks to the people that will spend it on your product. So, I mean, as I kind of grew through this and I started to realize, my own little truth and my own little journey, I wonder now if we're going to afford that mistake to Trump people. Kirstie Alley died yesterday, and Kirstie Alley was a huge Trump advocate, a believer that the January 6th was a lie. And she would appear on these shows like Fox and OAN and Newsmax. And then Curt Schilling was denied another chance to go into the Hall of Fame, a baseball player who was also equally BS crazy, right? But my neighbor, who I hope doesn't listen to this, was
okay. I'll put on my crisis communications consultant hat for a second here and say, if you have that concern, don't say it.
No, I don't. I actually don't have my concern, but I did vote for Trump, I think twice, right?
Okay.
And so Wendy, and we just don't talk politics, right?
Right.
So,
that's legit.
And he's a neighbor, and we have good fences and all that stuff. But recently, Wendy said something to him. She said something like, it's my wife, Wendy, said something to him like, well, hey, that's your guy. And he goes, not anymore. He's not my guy. And so the fact that he would say that, and it makes me kind of wonder it makes me wonder moving forward, if we can start to bring Trump people back in the fold. Are we going to make them lay prostrate on the ground and beg for forgiveness? Or we're just going to say, hey, we supported Clinton when he was banging everything with a smile in the 90s. And when he lied to a federal judge about it in an impeachment, what are you shaking your head for? I mean, I'm not comparing the two, but I'm saying that
I'm getting ready to agree with you.
Okay. Anyway, so I guess my point is that, I mean, I don't know how many friends you have up there in the Midwest that are Trumpers, but I imagine a lot of people, and in your business, you probably run into them too, although it's different. I guess my question is, do we bring them back in, and how do we do that? Right.
Yeah, I think you have to, right? How can you, we're what, 330 million people in the United States? How do you say to 80 million of them, and that's what, a little over a quarter of them, no, you're shunned forever. You're banned from the public square, and we can't even be seen with you. I mean, we can't create a sort of untouchable class that way. And I'd say the same thing for their side too, right? I mean, if they were ascendant as well, if they were ascendant, I'd say to them, you can't consign the 85 million
your microphone.
People, right?
Your microphone sounds like you're talking in the back room of a Radio Shack, but that's okay because your time is up, my friend. So we're gonna run. But
there you go. That's probably the best thing to do then.
Can we say this to Herschel Walker?
You're gonna win. Yeah.
I think by about 9 o'clock your time at the very latest, we'll say that.
All right, my friend. Talk to you soon. Thank you, buddy.
Yeah.
Again, John Austin, the John Austin Group, and again, former, and always a Politico, and always a good friend, and always somebody I turn to when I need that kind of insight. Coming up in just a couple minutes will be Mark Thompson, although he's not here. He doesn't like to do these things right near the beginning of his show.
Yeah, you did set this up really, really close to his show, my friend. Yeah.
Let me ask you this question, because I'm gonna talk about it today, and I'm also going to talk about it a little bit tomorrow. The death of Kirstie Alley.
Yeah.
We all kind of bit our lip because she was she was insane, right? Let's be honest.
Well, towards the end, I mean, her politics and her religion, I think, but
she's
that does not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, she's a Scientologist, and obviously she's a huge right winger. She kind of went down the conspiracy hole, from what I understand.
Oh, totally. She said January 6th, stolen, all the whole thing, right?
But that doesn't make a person. And you know what? I didn't say anything negative. I shared, the news of her passing. I did enjoy her in her, movies and TV shows. And it really does beg the question of what makes a person, and also what do you remember about a person? Is it the worst thing that they ever did, like you love to say, or can it be just the culmination of a life's work? And I hope it's the latter.
I go after James Woods all the time.
Yeah.
Another celebrity.
He's another crazy guy. Yeah.
Well, yeah. We go out and he writes me back. We DM each other. It's like
I would love to see that.
Oh,
that's
you got to
hilarious.
see the line. I should put it up. Well, I don't want him to stop because he goes, I'm not going to block you because I like kicking your ass. He tells me.
Oh,
right?
all right. Okay,
yeah.
sure.
So, but again, I was telling John, and I didn't tell Swalwell this, but I grew up really not following. For somebody that was living in DC, I grew up in DC. I didn't really get politics till I was about in my late 30s, early 40s.
Oh yeah.
Although that's not true. I remember when Reagan was elected and how depressed everybody was. But really, I do. I remember that because these young Republican, these pieces of crap. They were just like, saying, I mean, horrible stuff that like not too far from what Fuentes said, about Jews and about blacks. What I don't know how many people saw that bit where he goes, what's wrong with having to drink in another water fountain? I'm like, right. Yeah. So anyway, I guess my point is that I don't really know moving forward how to make this healing thing happen, because we got to figure it out.
Oh yeah.
And I, you and I both, we worked in a building, we did a show together for
several
3 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe longer than that. And
felt longer than that.
It just seemed it. And there was a station down the hall that it was a total
a door down. Yeah.
And
total right wing one. Yeah.
You could take a piece of paper and hit it.
There you go.
And it's funny. When we were in that environment, I could kind of sort of handle it. But now that I'm outside that environment, I'm kind of on my own. I have a little bit of more difficulty trying to deal with, when somebody refers to black people, if they ever said the N-word, I mean, like, how do you ever have a conversation with that person again?
Right. I mean, well, you call them out on it. Yeah. Well, I mean, as you know, I have people of different political leanings in my family, and it really caused rifts.
She's got an 11-year-old who's a right-wing Republican. It's amazing.
But no, it caused rifts early on, and as the years have passed, it's just we don't talk about those things, which on one hand makes it easier, but on the other hand, when you're living history, right? How many historic moments do we need to live through in the past couple of years, and not being able to share that with people that are close in your life, it hurts. And to kind of bring it back to Kirstie Alley, if people that you actually know in your own life are kind of like her, and something, God forbid, happens to them, what do you take from that relationship? Is it the end? Is it the politics? Does Trump get that too? Or do you just be like, you know what, that was a part of that person, but that wasn't everything about that person? And can you, separate those things? And that's tough. I don't know.
I think that, I think that's where we are. Oh, look, here you go.
I'll see you guys after lunch. Hi, Ricky O'Bear. Yeah.
The Nikki shows kicks off at noon. I'll just go to YouTube and
find me there.
/Nikki Medoro show. Yeah. MEDORO.
Thank you, my friend.
Yeah, I know.
Thank
I used
you.
to screw it up. Anyway, always great to see your face, kiddo.
Thank
and,
you.
We'll see you tomorrow. All right, have a great
Okay,
show. Hey, what are you
bye.
talking about? What are you out of the box?
Oh, well, follow the Herschel Walker loss, which if they elect this dude, I don't know what I'm going to lose my mind. Also, we're going to talk on the big yawn and the pushback of Trump running for president again, coming from his own freaking party. All these people jumping in. I have a little bit of science news. There's a germ killing spray that lasts for months, but is that a good thing? I don't know. We'll talk about a bunch of stuff. So coming up and in. All right.
The one and only Nikki Maduro. See you, boss. All right. Well, that's it for me. Tomorrow on the show, like I mentioned before, we're going to kind of obviously recap whatever happened in Georgia, and we don't know yet, but hopefully, I mean, I mean this even for Herschel Walker. The worst thing that could happen to this man is for him to be elected, right? And we'll get a big week coming up. So you can you can follow me on YouTube. Please do that. Subscribe to the show, and you can check it out. I'll have later on today exactly who's on the show tomorrow, and you can find me on Spotify and iTunes as well. Again, thanks to Moskowitz LLP, Steve Moskowitz. Again, the tax attorneys that not only sponsor the show, but really just help a lot of people and friends of mine that are musicians or comedians that hadn't paid taxes in years. I send them to them, and they come out, looking great. So there's a way to do this. So if you're caught behind, that rock, don't let it define your life. MoskowitzLLP.com or 888 tax deal. All right, that's it for me. Again, follow me at chip@chipfranklin.com. You can email me there, and we'll see you on tomorrow.
I can handle things. I'm smart. We shall overcome. Yes, we can.
Person, woman, man, camera, TV.
What the fuck is wrong with you?